hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The Pembrey estate sprawled across 2 acres of manicured lawn, with flowering cherry trees and a stone pathway leading to a garden where 30 people mingled around tables laden with food. David Rourke stood apart from the crowd, nursing a beer he hadn't drunk from. His eyes tracked his son, Levi, who was playing tag with cousins near the fire pit. David checked his watch. Another hour, then they could leave. He hadn't wanted to come to this family gathering. But Judith Pembrey insisted on hosting her grandson's birthday celebration, and David didn't want to take that away from Levi. The boy needed some semblance of normalcy, even if it meant David had to endure the Pembrey's judgment for an afternoon. More potato salad, David. Judith materialized beside him, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a glass of white wine dangling from her manicured fingers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. No, thank you. David kept his voice neutral, his face composed. Shame you're not eating. Helen spent all morning preparing the food. Judith's voice carried just enough to turn several heads their way. Then again, you never did appreciate what was offered to you, did you? David's jaw tightened, but he maintained his calm facade. 5 years of practicing self-control had taught him how to weather these small humiliations. How's the apartment? Must be quite an adjustment from the house you and Odessa shared. Judith sipped her wine, watching him over the rim of her glass. Before David could answer, she turned to her circle of friends who had gravitated closer, drawn by the scent of conflict. David here used to build houses, but now he lives in that tiny rental downtown. Quite the downgrade, isn't it? A woman in a linen dress laughed. At least he found a place in this market. Judith's eyes glittered. He's a terrible father, just like he was a terrible husband. The group erupted in laughter. David felt heat rise in his neck, but kept his expression placid. He learned long ago that showing anger only validated their opinion of him, the unpolished woodworker who'd never belonged in their circle, that a small voice cut through the laughter. That's not true. The group turned to see Levi, standing on a picnic bench, his small frame silhouetted against the afternoon sun. At 10, he had David's build, lean and tall for his age, but his mother's golden brown eyes. Eyes that were now blazing with indignation. Levi, honey, adults are talking. Odessa appeared from the crowd, reaching for her son's arm. Come down from there. No, Mom. Levi pulled away. They're being mean to Dad again. The gathering hushed. Even the other children stopped playing to watch. It's okay, Levi, David said quietly. We can head home if you want. Grandma, Levi continued, his voice clear and determined. Mom doesn't want to tell you this, but the entire party seemed to lean forward collectively. She's the one who kissed Uncle Ezra before the divorce. I saw it. The silence that followed was absolute. Odessa's face drained of color. She choked on her drink, coughing into her hand. Judith dropped her fork on her china plate with a clatter. What did you say, young man? David stood frozen, his eyes meeting his son's across the yard. Levi looked relieved, as if he'd been carrying this secret for too long. 5 years too long. Without a word, David set his untouched beer on a nearby table and walked across the lawn toward the exit. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He was calculating. Behind him, he heard Odessa's frantic voice. He's confused. It wasn't like that at all. David didn't look back. 5 years earlier, sawdust clung to the sweat on David's forearms as he sanded down the oak banister. The house smelled of fresh wood and varnish smells he'd come to associate with progress. With future, that he'd purchased this 3-acre plot with his own savings, designed the house himself, and built it piece by piece over weekends and evenings away from his furniture business. The colonial-style home was almost complete, with hand-carved moldings and custom cabinetry throughout. David, Odessa's voice echoed through the empty rooms. David set down his sanding block. Upstairs, Odessa appeared at the top of the stairs, elegant in a cream silk blouse and tailored slacks. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her makeup was impeccable despite the late hour. She looked out of place among the tools and sawdust. You're still working? It's almost midnight. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of varnish. Just finishing the banister. David smiled. What do you think? I matched the curve you liked from that magazine. Odessa glanced at it briefly. It's nice. Listen, Mom's charity auction is tomorrow night. You remember to pick up your tux, right? David's smile faded. I told you I can't make it. The contractor for the Henderson's cabin is coming by to go over final plans. Cancel it. Odessa sighed with exasperation. This auction is important. All of Mom's friends will be there, and half of the city council. I can't just cancel. People are depending on me too. To what? Build more furniture? David, this is about our future. Connections matter. She gestured around the unfinished house. All this physical labor, it's admirable, but won't get us where we need to be. David stared at her, trying to reconcile this woman with the one he'd fallen in love with in college, the art major, who'd sketched his hands while he worked on sets for the drama department, who'd marveled at his ability to shape wood into functional beauty. Where exactly do we need to be? He asked quietly. Odessa didn't answer. Instead, she checked her watch, a recent gift from her mother, and said, I'm having drinks with Ezra to discuss the foundation's legal strategy. Don't wait up. At the mention of his college friend, David felt a familiar unease. Ezra Lyle had become a frequent presence in their lives since taking a position at Judith's charitable foundation. Lately, it seemed Odessa preferred Ezra's company to his own. It's midnight, David pointed out. He just got back from New York. It was the only time he had available. She was already heading down the stairs. I left dinner in the microwave. Don't forget to check on Levi before you come to bed. The front door closed before he could respond. David ran his hand along the banister he'd spent hours perfecting. For the first time, he wondered if he was building this dream home for a family that no longer existed. The confirmation came 3 weeks later. David had picked up 5-year-old Levi from kindergarten early to take him fishing at a nearby Lake, a rare father-son outing during a workday. They returned home mid-afternoon, sun-warmed and laughing, with a small trout for dinner. David opened the front door, Levi chattering excitedly beside him. The house was silent, which was unusual. Odessa typically worked from home on Wednesdays. Mommy, we caught a fish. Levi ran ahead into the kitchen, then the living room, looking for his mother. David set down their fishing gear and followed, a strange prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He heard voices from upstairs, hushed, urgent. Instinctively, he placed a finger to his lips when Levi turned to him questioningly. Go wash your hands, buddy, David whispered. I'll find Mom. As Levi headed to the downstairs bathroom, David climbed the stairs silently, his hands sliding along the banister he'd crafted with such care. The master bedroom door was ajar. Through the crack, he saw Odessa, her back to the door. She was hastily buttoning her blouse. You said he wouldn't be home until dinner, a male voice hissed. David pushed the door open. Ezra Lyle stood by the window, tucking his shirt into his pants, his tie hanging loose around his neck. The three of them froze in a tableau of betrayal. David, Odessa breathed. It's not. Don't. David's voice was deadly quiet. Not with Levi downstairs. Ezra straightened, attempting dignity. David, man, we should talk. Get out of my house. David stepped aside from the doorway, his entire body rigid with restraint. Ezra grabbed his jacket and slipped past, not meeting David's eyes. When they were alone, Odessa moved toward him. David, please, let me explain. How long? The question scraped his throat like broken glass. Odessa looked away. A few months. A few months. While he'd been working overtime to finish their dream home. While he'd been coaching Levi's t-ball team. While he'd been planning their future. David, we can work through this, Odessa pleaded. For Levi's sake. At the mention of their son, something snapped inside David. Don't you dare use him as a shield. Not now. Footsteps padded up the stairs. Daddy? Is Mommy up here? David composed his face and turned to his son. Yes, buddy. Mom's just getting changed. Why don't we go make dinner? Show her our fish. He closed the bedroom door behind him, shutting away the ruins of his marriage as he led his son downstairs. The divorce was swift and brutal. Odessa hired the best attorney in Portland, a close friend of her mother's. She claimed David was emotionally neglectful, too consumed with work to be present for his family. Her attorney painted David as a man obsessed with building things but incapable of nurturing relationships, When David discovered that Odessa had been documenting every missed dinner, every late night in the workshop, every school event he couldn't attend due to client meetings, he realized she'd been planning this for longer than the affair. The Pembry name carried weight in Portland. Judges and commissioners knew Judith from charity events and political fundraisers. Testimonials from Odessa's friends, many of whom David had thought were his friends too, described him as distant, frustrated, occasionally angry. They conveniently omitted any mention of Ezra. By the time the dust settled, David had lost full custody of Levi, with visitation rights that amounted to every other weekend and one dinner a week. The house he'd built with his own hands went to Odessa in the settlement. His furniture business, once growing steadily, faltered as he fought legal battles he couldn't afford. Ezra, meanwhile, quietly left town, resigned from the foundation, sold his condo, and disappeared. David later learned he'd bought into a tech startup in Seattle, reinventing himself while leaving scorched earth behind. David moved into a small apartment downtown, converted his workshop into a bare-bones living arrangement, and focused on the only things he had left: his limited time with Levi and a growing, cold determination to reclaim what was taken from him. Not the house, not even Odessa, but his dignity, his reputation, and eventually his soul in the emptiness of his new life. David became obsessed with self-mastery. He studied stoicism and meditation. He exercised rigorously, transforming his body into something hardened and controlled. He took online courses in finance, law, digital security in the privacy of his sparse apartment. With the silence of loneliness pressing in, David began to plan. David's key turned in the lock of his downtown apartment, the mechanisms clicking into place with precision. The sound echoed in the stillness. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The late afternoon sun slanted through half-closed blinds, casting striped shadows across hardwood floors. The apartment was small but functional. A leather couch faced a modest television. A dining table doubled as a desk. The kitchen was clean, minimal appliances tucked away, counters bare. Nothing unnecessary, nothing wasted. But the living room wall told a different story. Where most people might hang art or family photos, David had constructed a map of connections. Red strings linked photos to documents, names to dates, business cards to newspaper clippings. At the center, the Pembry family tree. Judith at the top, Odessa beneath her. Branches extended to Ezra Lyle, various foundation board members, city officials, lawyers. 5 years of patient research, all interconnected on this wall. David approached it now, reaching into his pocket for his phone. He pulled up the recording app and pressed play. Levi's clear voice filled the room. "She's the one who kissed Uncle Ezra before the divorce." I saw it. He placed a small recording device in Levi's hoodie pocket before the party, not to spy on his son, but to document any potential manipulation from Odessa or her family. He hadn't expected this revelation. David's finger hovered over the delete button, but then he paused. This wasn't just about vindication anymore. This was evidence that the narrative Odessa had created of David as the cold, neglectful husband was built on lies. He connected his phone to his laptop and created an audio file. Then he opened an encrypted email account he'd established months ago under a pseudonym. He attached the audio file to an email addressed to portlandelite.com, a blog notorious for exposing scandals among the city's wealthy families. Subject: Pembry Foundation Hypocrisy Body. The Pembry family presents itself as Portland's moral compass. Their foundation hosts galas against domestic violence while covering up affairs in their own home. Listen to what Judith Pembry's grandson revealed today about his mother, Odessa Pembry, and family friend Ezra Lyle. The truth deserves to be heard. David hit send, then deleted the email from his outbox. He'd routed it through enough proxies that it couldn't be traced back to him. But he moved to the kitchen and opened a small wooden box on the counter, one of the few items he'd crafted since the divorce. Inside lay several cigars. He removed one, cut it with precise movements, and lit it. The rich smoke filled his lungs as he exhaled toward the ceiling. In the swirling gray, he imagined the first small flame of a much larger fire. Returning to the wall, David pinned a new note beside Odessa's photo. Affair exposed. Then he added today's date that IT had begun. Salvage works occupied a renovated warehouse in North Portland. The building itself was a testament to reclamation, brick walls scrubbed clean, original beams exposed, concrete floors polished to a soft sheen. Inside, the space was filled with rescued architectural elements. Vintage doors stacked against one wall, antique fixtures hanging from ceiling rafts, reclaimed wood sorted by type and size. David ran his hand along a section of old-growth fir, feeling the dense grain beneath his fingers. In another life, he would have been excited to incorporate this into a custom piece. Now, he was here on different business. "You must be David." A woman's voice, low and direct, came from behind a massive oak counter. Jenny Alcott moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in her own space. She was around David's age, maybe younger, with dark hair cut in a practical bob. Tattoos peeked out from the rolled sleeves of her flannel shirt, geometric patterns on one arm, and behind her ear, a single black feather. "Ms. Alcott." David extended his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." Her handshake was firm. "Jenny, please. And let's skip the part where you pretend to be interested in reclaimed lumber. You wanted to talk about Judith Pembry." David's expression remained neutral, but inwardly, he appreciated her directness. Word travels fast. In certain circles. Jenny leaned against the counter. When someone starts asking questions about Pembry properties and development history, people notice, especially people who've been burned, like your father. A flash of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by wariness. "You've done your homework." Alcott Architecture, specialized in sustainable design, locally sourced materials. Filed for bankruptcy 7 years ago after 3 major projects fell through simultaneously. David maintained eye contact. All 3 were on land that subsequently ended up in Pembry Foundation development portfolios. Jenny crossed her arms. "And how exactly is this your business?" "It's not, but we might have shared interests." For a long moment, she studied him, assessing. Then she gestured toward a door at the back of the warehouse. "Coffee's this way." They sat in a small office with exposed brick walls and a view of the lumberyard. Jenny poured coffee from a thermos into 2 mugs, sliding one across her desk to David. "So you're the ex-husband." She settled into her chair. "The woodworker who lost the custody battle." David took a sip of his coffee. "Strong and black. That's part of the story. The part the Pembrys tell. You built a house, lost a wife, and couldn't handle it." Her tone wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. "Now you're what? Looking for revenge." "I'm looking for justice." David set down his mug. "And I think you are too." Jenny's laugh was short and sharp. "Justice doesn't exist for people like us. Not when we're up against people like them. Tell me about your father's firm." The request seemed to catch her off guard. She stared at him for a beat, then shrugged. "Dad believed in sustainable architecture before it was trendy. Built a solid reputation in the 90s. Then the Pembrys came along with their downtown revitalization initiative. Promised contracts, visibility, the works. But the contracts never materialized. Worse, they did, then they disappeared. Suddenly permits were denied, zoning changed, investors pulled out. 3 major projects, one after another. Jenny's eyes hardened. Dad lost everything. His business, his reputation, eventually his health. Judith Pembry personally called him a small thinker at a city council meeting. David nodded. The pattern was familiar. "And now you're salvaging what others throw away. Poetic, isn't it?" Jenny gestured around the office. "I find broken pieces and make them useful again." Meanwhile, the Pembrys keep breaking things for profit. What if we could break their profit? David asked quietly. Jenny leaned forward, elbows on her desk. "I'm listening. I need access to building records from Pembry developments. Historical permits, contractor lists, material sources. Especially for projects between 2016 and 2018. That's specific. Those years marked the Pembry Foundation's biggest growth. It's also when Ezra Lyle became legal counsel." Jenny's eyes narrowed. "The same Ezra who was sleeping with your wife." David didn't flinch at her bluntness. "Yes. What exactly are you planning, Mr. Rourke?" "Nothing illegal. Just connecting dots that already exist." He met her gaze steadily. I need someone who understands Portland's development history. Someone with access to records and contacts that I don't have. Jenny drummed her fingers on the desk. And what do I get out of this partnership? The satisfaction of watching Judith Pembrey's carefully constructed image crumble. David paused. And full credit for any reclamation projects that come from properties the foundation is forced to liquidate. A slow smile spread across Jenny's face. You've really thought this through, haven't you? For 5 years. Jenny considered him for a long moment, then stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. She unlocked it with a key from her pocket and removed a thick folder. These are copies of every permit application my father filed that intersected with Pembrey interests. She placed a folder on the desk, including notes on the conversations and promises made. David didn't reach for it. Why would you keep these? Same reason you've been planning for 5 years. She pushed the folder toward him. Some fires don't go out just because you walk away from them. I'll need more than documents, David said. I'll need your expertise, your contacts, and possibly my criminal record. When David raised an eyebrow, Jenny shrugged. 2 arrests for protest activities at development sites. Never convicted. That's not why I'm here. No, but it's a bonus. I know people who won't talk to someone like you. She studied him again, making a decision. There's someone else you should meet. Someone who lost even more than we did. Franklin Fig Gutierrez lived in a modest bungalow in northeast Portland. The house was immaculate lawn precisely trimmed, walkways swept, American flag hanging beside the door. When he opened the door to David and Jenny, he wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt, despite the weekend hour. Ms. Alcott. Fig's greeting was formal, his handshake brief but solid. His eyes, when they turned to David, were assessing. Military, David thought immediately. The precise posture, the economy of movement. This is David Rourke, Jenny said. He's interested in the Greenfield project. Fig's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Then you'd better come in. The living room was sparse but comfortable. No family photos, David noted. Bookshelves filled with history and biographies. A chest set on a side table, game in progress. Coffee, Fig offered. We're fine. Jenny answered for both of them. David has a proposition I think you'll want to hear. Fig settled into an armchair, back straight, hands resting on his knees. I'm listening. David chose his words carefully. I understand your family owned property that was part of the Greenfield development in 2017. My parents owned it. 3rd generation. Fig's voice remained even. 20 acres of productive farmland. My grandfather built the house himself after coming back from Korea. The eminent domain claim said it was for a community health center, David prompted. That was the official story. Fig's jaw tightened slightly. They bulldozed it for a parking structure instead. The health center is 3 stories of luxury medical offices. Plastic surgery, boutique wellness. Nothing my neighborhood needed. Your parents fought it. Every step. Spent their retirement savings on lawyers. Fig's hands formed fists, then deliberately relaxed. Mom had a stroke 2 weeks after the demolition. Dad moved to Arizona with my sister. He won't come back to Portland. David nodded, understanding the cost beyond money. And you stayed. Marines taught me not to abandon territory. Fig's gaze was direct. I monitor their activities. Every zoning meeting, every permit application. I know who's taking bribes and which contractors cut corners. How close do you watch them? David asked. Close enough to know Judith Pembrey's foundation shifted $3.2 million to an offshore account last quarter. Fig's face showed no expression. Close enough to track Ezra Lyle's movements since he left town. Seattle, San Francisco, Singapore. Jenny shot David a significant look. Told you he'd be useful. What exactly are you planning? Fig asked David. Information gathering. Strategic pressure points. Legal exposure of illegal activities. David kept his tone businesslike. No physical interventions. No threats. Just the truth they've been hiding. Fig studied him, then stood and walked to a closet. He returned with a laptop, opening it on the coffee table. Cybersecurity was my specialty in the Corps. I've been documenting Pembrey Foundation activities for 3 years. The screen filled with spreadsheets, documents, photographs. Dates, amounts, names. Everything's backed up in triplicate, Fig continued. Encrypted, secured. I was waiting for the right moment. Or the right ally. David leaned forward, examining the information. This is extensive. I'm thorough. Fig met David's eyes. But I need to know your endgame. What happens when you have all the pieces? Public exposure. Legal consequences. Financial reparations to those they've harmed. David held his gaze. And in my case, custody of my son. Fig considered this, then nodded once. Proportional response. I can work with that. As I left Fig's house an hour later, Jenny glanced sideways at David. You didn't tell me you had a son. I didn't tell you a lot of things. Fair enough. She stopped beside her truck. Are we really doing this? Taking on the Pembrys. David looked back at Fig's house, then at Jenny with her crow feather tattoo. 3 broken pieces, each with their own reason to seek restoration. Yes, he said. We are. The coffee shop buzzed with mid-morning activity, students hunched over laptops, remote workers in video meetings, baristas calling out orders. David sat in a corner booth, laptop open, a steaming mug untouched beside him. Across the table, Fig typed with methodical precision, his expression unchanged as information populated the screen. Ezra Lyle established shell companies in the Caymans, Singapore, and Estonia between 2016 and 2018. Fig reported, his voice low. Each one received transfers from Pembry Foundation accounts designated for international outreach initiatives. David studied the transaction records Fig had obtained. How much total? For $0.7 million. Fig scrolled through the data. Coincidentally, that's almost identical to the amount Ezra invested in Blue Haven Technologies in early 2019. Right after he disappeared from Portland, David's mouth tightened. And Odessa's signature is on these transfer authorizations? On 3 of them. As a foundation board member, Fig enlarged a document showing Odessa's flowing signature on a wire transfer form. She can claim ignorance of where the money ultimately went, but not that she approved its initial movement. David saved the documents to an encrypted drive. Any direct connection to Judith? Nothing explicit. Fig's tone remained neutral, but his eyes reflected satisfaction. But I found something else. The foundation received a series of anonymous donations that matched to the dollar the amounts withdrawn from several development project budgets. Money laundering. Political connections. Working on it. Fig closed one window and opened another. I have recorded conversations between Judith and 2 city commissioners regarding zoning changes. Not enough to prove bribery, but suspicious. David nodded. Jenny's making progress on that front. She's been combing through building permits, finding irregularities. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled. David glanced up to see Jenny enter, rain dripping from her jacket. She spotted them and made her way to their booth, sliding in beside Fig. Morning, boys. She pushed damp hair from her forehead. Having fun with spreadsheets. Fig didn't look up from his screen. Financial tracing isn't meant to be fun. Spoken like a true Marine. Jenny pulled a USB drive from her pocket and slid it across the table to David. Building department records. 3 Pembry projects that broke at least 6 code regulations each, signed off by the same inspector. Who's now retired in Palm Springs, David guessed. Bingo. Jenny grinned. With a very nice house for someone on a city employee's pension. David added the drive to their growing collection of evidence. For 3 months, they'd been gathering threads, connecting dots. The pattern was becoming clearer, a web of corruption extending from Judith Pembry through various officials, contractors, and board members. How's our other project progressing? Jenny asked, lowering her voice further. David minimized his current window and opened a different file. Micah Wells, Harvard Law, joined the Pembry legal team 2 years ago, currently dating Odessa. The screen showed a well-dressed man in his late 30s, tall, conventionally handsome, with a polished look of old money. Photos showed him at charity events, his arm around Odessa's waist, both of them smiling for cameras. He's perfect, David continued. Narcissistic personality. 3 complaints of ethics violations in Massachusetts before moving to Oregon. And a gambling habit he keeps carefully hidden. How did you find that out? Jenny leaned forward, intrigued. Fig tracked his weekend trips to Las Vegas. always stays at the Bellagio, always takes the private elevator to the high-stakes rooms. Fig looked up from his laptop. Credit card debt of $127,000 spread across 4 accounts. Recently paid down to $43,000 from an unknown source. Odessa. David shook his head. She doesn't have that kind of liquidity without her mother knowing. I think he found another source of funds. The foundation, Jenny suggested. Not directly. Too obvious. David pulled up another document, a business proposal, with glossy renderings of modern buildings nestled among trees. This is what we'll use. Ecolux Village, a proposed development combining luxury housing with sustainable design. Jenny studied the images. This isn't real. It is now. David clicked through the professional-looking portfolio, complete with projected returns, investor packages, and exclusive early access opportunities. Understanding dawned on Jenny's face. You're baiting him. Fig created a convincing digital footprint. I established connections with legitimate green builders who were supposedly involved. David closed the laptop. All Micah sees is an opportunity to solve his debt problem without anyone knowing. And when he bites, Fig asked, he'll use money from one of the foundation's discretionary accounts. The same pattern they've established before, but this time, we'll have documented every step. David took his first sip of now-cold coffee. When the project vanishes, so will his investment. He'll panic, try to cover it up, and dig himself deeper. Jenny whistled softly. Remind me never to get on your bad side. David's expression remained impassive. I don't have a bad side, just a patient one. David's apartment was transformed on weekend visits. Levi's presence filled the space with energy that made the Stark rooms feel almost like a home. Today, they sat at the dining table, homework pushed aside in favor of the model cabin kit David had bought. First, we sort all the pieces. David laid out the tiny wooden components on a cloth. Frame, walls, roof. Everything has its place in the final structure. Levi examined a miniature rafter. Like your work wall? David glanced at the network of strings and photos, now covered with a sheet when Levi visited. What do you mean? The wall with all the pictures and strings. Levi shrugged. I saw it last time when you were in the shower. It looked cool like in detective movies. David kept his face neutral, but mentally noted to be more careful. That's just a project I'm working on. About Mom and Grandma. Levi's eyes, so much like Odessa's, held a perception beyond his years. David considered his words carefully. Partly. It's complicated adult stuff. I'm not a baby, Dad. Levi set down the piece he was holding. I know things aren't right between you and Mom. Your mom and I have different opinions about what's best, David said evenly. She says you're angry all the time, that you don't know how to be happy anymore. The statement hung in the air between them. David felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the pressure of controlling his reaction, of not letting Levi see the depth of his resentment toward Odessa. What do you think? David asked finally. Levi thought for a moment. I think you're sad sometimes. But you're not angry, not like Mom says. You're just waiting. The perception in those words struck David like a physical blow. Out of the mouth of babes. Do you ever miss Mom? Levi asked suddenly. From before, David's hands stilled on the model pieces. He could lie, say no, feed his son's growing disillusionment with Odessa. But something in him resisted that manipulation. Sometimes, he admitted, I miss who we were together before things changed. Levi nodded, seeming satisfied with the honesty. I miss her sometimes too, but not all the time. He looked down at the model pieces. I don't trust her anymore. Not since she lied about Uncle Ezra. David wanted to press for details about what Levi had seen, what else he might know. But he held back. Using his son as an information source felt wrong, a line he wasn't willing to cross despite everything else he'd done. That's understandable, David said instead. Trust is like this cabin. Once it's broken, you have to rebuild it piece by piece. Can it ever be the same again? David picked up a small wooden beam, turning in his fingers. No, but sometimes what you rebuild is stronger than what was there before. Levi considered this, then reached for the instruction sheet. Show me how to start the foundation. For the next hour, they worked in comfortable focus, placing each tiny piece with care, securing joints with miniature pegs. David guided Levi's hands when needed, but mostly let him figure things out himself, offering advice rather than taking over. Patience is the most important tool, David explained as Levi struggled with a particularly small connection. Rush, and you'll break something. Take your time, and everything finds its place. As they worked, David thought about the other construction project underway, the careful dismantling of the Pembry Foundation. Like this model, it required precision, patience, and an understanding of how each piece connected to the whole. Dad, Levi interrupted his thoughts. If I told the judge I want to live with you, would that help? The question caught David off guard. Where is this coming from? Levi shrugged, not meeting his eyes. Mom's been talking about moving. Her and Micah. To San Francisco, maybe. David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. When did she tell you this? She didn't. I heard them talking. Levi fit another piece into place. She said there's nothing keeping her in Portland anymore except me and Grandma. David carefully set down the piece he was holding, aware that his first instinct to tighten his grip might snap it in half. Would you want to live with me? He asked, keeping his voice level. Yeah. Levi's answer came without hesitation. You show up, even when it's hard. Mom just says things and then does different things. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. To answer your question, David said, the judge would consider your opinion more now that you're older. But there are a lot of factors. Levi nodded, seeming older than his 10 years. I know. Grandma knows judges and stuff. The simplicity of his statement contained a truth that had shaped their lives for years. Judith knew people. Judith had influence. Judith controlled the narrative, but narratives could change. Evidence could shift the story. Let's finish the roof, David suggested, bringing them back to the task at hand. That's what makes it a real shelter. The Pembry Foundation Gala filled the ballroom of Portland's most exclusive hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly from a corner dais. The city's elite mingled in evening wear, champagne flutes in hand, checkbooks at the ready. Jenny moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her black cocktail dress and upswept hair transforming her from salvage yard owner to anonymous server. She balanced a tray of hors d'oeuvres, offering them with a deferential smile while her eyes continuously scanned the room. In her ear, a tiny communication device connected her to David and Fig, who monitored from a hotel room 2 floors above, surrounded by surveillance equipment. Judith is at the north end with the mayor, Jenny murmured, turning as if to adjust her tray. Odessa and Micah just arrived, making the rounds by the west entrance. Any sign of Senator Wheeler? David's voice came through the earpiece. Jenny circulated through the crowd, noting faces, catching fragments of conversation. Not yet. Wait, doorway, just arriving. Through the grand entrance came Senator James Wheeler, silver-haired and commanding in his tuxedo. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. Target acquired, Jenny confirmed. Moving toward Judith now. Stay close, but not obvious, Fig instructed. Remember, we need clear audio. Jenny approached a nearby table, offering canapes while positioning herself within earshot of Judith and the senator. The sophisticated recording device, disguised as a serving button on her uniform, would capture their conversation. James, darling. Judith air-kissed the senator's cheeks. So glad you could tear yourself away from Washington for our little gathering. For you, Judith, always. The senator accepted a champagne from a passing server. Though I suspect your call about urgent foundation business wasn't just social. Judith's laugh tinkled like her diamonds. Sharp as ever. Let's step onto the terrace. The air in here is stifling. Jenny followed at a discreet distance, moving toward the terrace doors as if to serve guests outside. She positioned herself near a potted palm, arranging items on her tray, while the recording device captured the conversation. The zoning committee votes next week, Judith was saying, her voice low but clear. The riverfront property is essential for Phase 2. It's proving complicated, the senator replied. Environmental impact statements, indigenous land claims. Public sentiment is turning against development there. Public sentiment is like the weather, James. Changeable and ultimately irrelevant to those of us indoors. Judith's tone hardened slightly. The foundation has been very generous to your campaigns over the years. $3 million in philanthropic initiatives that coincidentally benefited your key districts. I'm aware of our arrangement, Judith. Then be aware of this. If the vote doesn't go our way, certain documentation regarding those initiatives might find its way to less understanding eyes. The senator was silent for a moment. That sounds remarkably like a threat. Oh, James. Judith's laugh was soft but without warmth. Between friends, it's merely a reminder of mutual interests. The money has already been allocated for the community center your wife wants to establish in her hometown. $15 million. Quite a legacy for her family name, don't you think? Jenny moved away as a real server approached, circulating back into the ballroom. Did you get that? She whispered. Every word. Fig confirmed, satisfaction evident in his voice. Clear evidence of quid pro quo. Well done. David's voice was calm. The audio is perfect. One more task, then you can exit. Jenny moved through the crowd, now seeking Micah Wells. She found him near the bar, one arm around Odessa's waist as he charmed a group of potential donors. These sustainable initiatives are the future of our foundation's work, he was saying, his smile practiced and gleaming. The board has already approved preliminary funding for projects that will transform Portland's relationship with its natural environment. Odessa beamed beside him, elegant in emerald silk that matched her mother's emerald ring. Micah has been instrumental in reshaping our investment strategy. We're focusing on long-term environmental impact paired with economic growth. Jenny circulated close enough to slip the folded business card onto Micah's empty cocktail plate as she collected it. The card looked ordinary cream-colored stock, minimalist logo, but contained contact information for the fabricated Ecolux Village project. Mission complete, she made her way toward the service exit. Package delivered. Heading out now. Roger that, Fig responded. Rendezvous at Checkpoint Alpha in 15 minutes. As Jenny slipped away from the gala, she allowed herself a small smile. The powerful played their games, made their deals, protected their interests. But they never noticed the servers, the workers, the people they had stepped on to build their empires. Until now in the hotel room, David and Fig began dismantling their surveillance equipment. The recording of Judith's conversation with the senator had been immediately backed up to multiple secure locations. This brings our total to 17 documented instances of ethics violations. Fig noted, his tone matter of fact. 9 potential criminal charges. David nodded, reviewing the audio transcript on his laptop. All pieces for Blacoque. Blacoque was the name they'd given to their secured digital vault, a repository for all evidence collected over the past 7 months. Every document, recording, and financial record had been verified, authenticated, and organized into an irrefutable case against the Pembry Foundation and its key members. Micah took the bait, David added, showing Fig a notification on his phone, an email from an account they monitored. He's requesting investment information on Ecolux. Fig packed the last of the equipment into an unmarked case. Timeline, 2 weeks, maybe 3. David closed his laptop. Once Micah commits foundation funds to our non-existent project, we'll have the final piece. And then, David looked out the hotel window toward the glittering ballroom visible across the courtyard. From this distance, the gala looked like a perfect snow globe, beautiful, pristine, contained. And then we shake it until the snow falls differently. David sat at his dining table, 3 laptops open before him. The room was dark except for their screen's glow. A half-empty coffee cup had gone cold beside him. On the wall, his network of photos and connections remained, but now many items were marked with red checks, completed pieces of a complex puzzle. His phone buzzed. Fig's text. Micah transferred $2.4 million to Ecolux account. Using Foundation discretionary fund. Confirmed. David allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. The final domino was in place that he opened the central laptop and navigated to a secure messaging system. Cara Winters was a respected investigative journalist who had built her reputation exposing corporate corruption. She had no connection to the Pembrys, no reason to protect them, and most importantly, an impeccable record for fact-checking before publishing a mess. Winters, for the past year, I have been collecting evidence of systematic corruption, fraud, and illegal business practices by the Pembry Foundation and its leadership. The attached file, password, truth_rises, contains verifiable documentation including financial records, audio recordings, and sworn statements. Key findings include embezzlement of foundation funds totaling $7.3 million, bribery of public officials for zoning and permit approvals, money laundering through offshore accounts, tax fraud through misrepresented charitable donations. Witness intimidation and blackmail. All sources have been authenticated. All records can be independently verified. I trust you will give this the attention it deserves. A concerned citizen. David attached the Blackcoke files, meticulously organized, extensively documented, impossible to dismiss as conspiracy or conjecture. Then he sent the message. He sat back in his chair, strangely calm. 5 years of planning, organizing, and waiting, now condensed into a single email. The match had been struck. His phone buzzed again. Jenny this time. It's done, David replied. Yes. 3 dots appeared as she typed. Then, how long? 48 hours at most. She'll verify everything first. Another pause. Then, no going back now. David looked at the message for a long moment before responding. There never was. The explosion came faster than even David had anticipated. By the following afternoon, Kara Winters had published the first in what would become a series of explosive reports. Her headline blazed across news sites and social media. Pembrys of Portland, philanthropy or fraud? The story laid out the foundation's financial misconduct in meticulous detail. Winters had independently verified the money trails, confirming millions in misappropriated funds. She had cross-referenced the audio recordings with public statements, revealing stark contradictions. David watched the fallout from his apartment, refreshing news sites every few minutes. FIG had established an encrypted group chat for the 3 of them to monitor developments in real time. FIG, State Attorney General's office, just announced preliminary investigation. Jenny, foundation stock down 17% already. Board members scrambling. David, keep watching. It's only beginning. By evening, the story had gone national. Financial news channels ran segments on the Portland philanthropy scandal. Social media buzzed with outrage as details emerged about the foundation's exploitation of vulnerable communities, the same communities they claimed to serve. David's phone rang a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. Mr. Rourke? A woman's voice, professional and direct. This is Kara Winters. David's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. Ms. Winters, I've been following your reporting. I'm sure you have. There was a knowing quality to her tone. I'm also sure you're aware that when anonymous sources provide this kind of documentation, journalists work to identify them. I would expect nothing less. Your digital footprint was impressive, almost invisible. A pause. Almost. David said nothing. I'm not calling to expose you. Winters continued. Your evidence stands on its own merits. I've verified enough to be confident in its authenticity. Then why are you calling? Professional curiosity. This wasn't just data collection. This was a methodical dismantling. Another pause. This was personal. Does that change the facts? No. Winters' voice softened slightly. But it does add context. The custody battle, the house you built, the affair with Ezra Lyle. David felt a chill. She had dug deeper than he expected. My motivations don't invalidate the evidence, he said carefully. No, they don't. In fact, they make it more compelling. Her tone was thoughtful. The Pembrys have been untouchable for decades because people were too afraid to challenge them. You weren't afraid, you were patient. That's a different kind of dangerous. David remained silent, waiting. I won't mention you in my reporting, Winters assured him. But I thought you should know they figured out. Judith was just served with official notice of the investigation, and her first words were about you. What did she say? That goddamn carpenter finally found his spine. Winters' voice held a note of admiration. I think it was meant as an insult, but it struck me as rather poetic. After the call ended, David updated the group chat. They know it was us. Doesn't matter now. Jenny, lawyer friends say FBI involved now. Foundation accounts frozen. Fig, Judith's being questioned. Odessa 2, David. Ezra, Fig, tracked to Singapore airport 3 hours ago. Trying to flee to non-extradition country. Jenny, too late. Interpol flagged his passport. Detained at customs, David set down his phone. Outside his window, rain streaked the glass, blurring the city lights. Somewhere across town, Judith Pembry was facing questions she couldn't dismiss with money or influence. Odessa was watching her carefully constructed life unravel, and Ezra, the friend who had betrayed him, the man who had helped destroy his family, was sitting in an airport detention room, nowhere to run. The news alert chimed on all 3 laptops simultaneously. David looked at the headline. Pembry Foundation suspended pending criminal investigation, assets frozen. It had taken less than 24 hours, that be why the second day. The dominoes were falling faster than even David had anticipated. His phone vibrated continuously with updates. Fig, Judith's personal accounts frozen. Attempt to transfer $12 million offshore blocked. Jenny, Odessa subpoenaed for testimony before grand jury. Charged with conspiracy and negligent mismanagement. Fig, Ezra, being extradited. Facing multiple fraud charges in U.S. and Singapore. The most satisfying update came that afternoon. Jenny, Michael Wells caught at private airfield trying to flee to Mexico. Arrested on site. David allowed himself a small smile at that. Fig had anonymously tipped airport security about Micah's escape plan, ensuring cameras were rolling when Portland's self-proclaimed ethical legal mind was led away in handcuffs that BY evening. Micah's name was trending on social media as Portland's sleaziest lawyer, with footage of his arrest playing on loop on local news. The expression on his face, entitlement giving way to panic, was exactly what David had envisioned for 5 years. His phone rang again. Odessa's number. He let it go to voicemail that a text followed immediately. We need to talk. About Levi. David's jaw tightened. Of course she would use their son now. He typed back, through our lawyers only. Her response was swift. This isn't legal. It's parental. Please. David stared at the message, weighing his options. Finally, he replied, tomorrow. 10 a.m. The part by the river. Public place. Thank you, came her response. David set down his phone, a complex mix of emotions churning beneath his calm exterior. The victory he'd planned for so long was unfolding perfectly. Yet there was no euphoria, no triumphant release, only a steady resolve to see it through to its conclusion. For Levi. For himself. For the truth that had been buried under years of Pembry manipulation. The fire he'd ignited was burning exactly as planned. Now he needed to ensure his son was safely beyond its reach. The riverfront park was quiet on a weekday morning. A few joggers passed on the path, and an elderly man tossed bread to demanding ducks. David arrived early, positioning himself on a bench with clear sight lines in all directions. Old habits of caution died hard. He spotted Odessa before she saw him. She approached from the parking lot. Her usual confident stride diminished. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than her typical styled waves. No makeup, no designer outfit, just jeans and a gray sweater that made her look smaller, more vulnerable than a performance, David reminded himself. Everything with Odessa was calculated for effect. She saw him and straightened her shoulders, summoning a ghost of her former poise. As she came closer, he noticed the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. David. She stopped a few feet from the bench. Thank you for meeting me. He nodded, but didn't invite her to sit. You want to talk about Levi? Odessa glanced around, then settled onto the far end of the bench, maintaining distance between them. He's confused, scared. Everyone at school is talking about the investigation. About us. And whose fault is that? The words came out sharper than David intended. Odessa flinched. I know you're behind this. The evidence, the journalist. It's too perfectly constructed to be coincidence. Does that make it any less true? She looked away, toward the river. No, that's the worst part. It's all true. The admission hung between them. 5 years ago, It might have meant something to David, this acknowledgement of guilt, this moment of honesty. Now it was just another fact, cataloged and filed away. What exactly do you want, Odessa? She turned back to him, eyes suddenly fierce. I want you to protect our son from this fallout. The reporters are circling. They want to talk to him, get the child a scandal angle. I've already arranged for him to stay with me during the investigation. My lawyer filed the emergency custody petition yesterday. You didn't even discuss it with me. Accusation crept into her voice. Like you discussed moving to San Francisco with Micah. David countered evenly. Odessa's eyes widened slightly. Levi told you. He overheard you. Just like he overheard a lot of things over the years. David kept his gaze steady. Children absorb more than we think. Silence fell between them again. A jogger passed, earbuds in, oblivious to their tension. You've destroyed everything, Odessa said finally, her voice low. The foundation, mother's reputation, my future. You did that yourself, David replied, not unkindly, but firmly. Every decision, every lie, every manipulation. I just exposed what was already there. You loved me once. She reached for his hand, a desperate move so unlike the controlled Odessa he had known. David withdrew his hand before she could touch him. I loved who you pretended to be. Something in Odessa's expression crumpled. For a moment, the facade fell completely, revealing the frightened woman beneath the Pembry armor. What am I supposed to do now? Real fear colored her voice. They're talking about criminal charges, David. Prison. You'll do what people without wealth and connections do. David stood from the bench. You'll face the consequences of your actions. Is that what this has all been about? Revenge. Justice. David corrected. For me. For Levi. For everyone else your family has stepped on. As he turned to leave, Odessa called after him. You can't just walk away. David paused, looking back at the woman he had once built a home for. Yes, I can. That's the difference between us. I learned how to walk away and start over. You never did. He left her on the bench, her perfectly constructed world collapsing around her, just as his had 5 years before. That evening, David received a text from an unknown number. The great Judith Pembry requests your presence. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the foundation office. He showed the message to Fig and Jenny, who had gathered at his apartment to monitor the ongoing developments. It's a trap, Jenny warned immediately. She'll have lawyers, maybe recording devices. Agreed, Fig nodded. Engagement presents unnecessary risk. David considered their concerns. It's a desperate last move from someone who's losing everything. All the more dangerous, Jenny argued. Cornered animals bite hardest. I need to hear what she has to say. David's decision was made. But I won't go alone. The Pembry Foundation headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. David had never been inside. His social standing hadn't warranted an invitation during his marriage to Odessa, and certainly not after. Now he stood in the marble lobby, Fig beside him, dressed in a suit that emphasized his military bearing. They had agreed that Jenny would remain outside, monitoring communication and ready to intervene if necessary. The security desk, usually staffed by multiple guards, had only one distracted employee who barely glanced at their IDs before waving them toward the private elevator. Signs of downsizing already. Fig observed quietly as the elevator doors closed. The executive floor was eerily quiet. No assistants bustled between offices, no phones rang. The walls, covered in photographs of Judith with various celebrities and politicians, seemed like museum artifact from a bygone era. That Judith's assistant, the only employee visible, led them to a conference room rather than Judith's office. Mrs. Pembry will join you shortly, she said, her voice tight with stress. When the door closed behind her, Fig immediately began a subtle sweep of the room, checking for recording devices. He nodded once to David. Clean. Judith entered 5 minutes later alone. Her appearance shocked David, though he kept his face impassive. The imperious, immaculately presented woman who had belittled him for years looked diminished. Her designer suit hung slightly loose, as if she'd lost weight rapidly. Her makeup couldn't fully conceal the exhaustion in her face. She eyed Fig with suspicion. I asked to see you alone. Mr. Gutierrez is my associate, David replied calmly. He stays. Judith's mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. She took a seat at the head of the conference table habit, David supposed, from decades of controlling rooms. I know what you've done, she began without preamble. Very thorough, very patient. I underestimated you. David said nothing, waiting. The board has suspended me pending the investigation. Her voice betrayed a slight tremor. 40 years building this foundation, and they removed me with a single vote. Actions have consequences, David said. Judith's eyes flashed with momentary fire. Don't patronize me. I've spent my life dealing with consequences, fixing them, avoiding them, creating them for others. She leaned forward. What I want to know is your price. My price. David kept his expression neutral. To stop this. Judith gestured vaguely around her, indicating the collapsing empire. To withdraw whatever evidence you've provided, claim it was fabricated, retract your accusations. David couldn't help but laugh a short, incredulous sound. It doesn't work that way. The investigation has its own momentum now. The evidence speaks for itself. Everything can be managed, Judith insisted. With the right influence, the right narrative. I still have connections. Not anymore. David's voice was matter of fact. Your senator friends are distancing themselves. Your financial allies are protecting their own interests. The encryption on that evidence can't be broken, and multiple agencies have copies. Judith's facade cracked further. You're tearing this family apart. No, David replied coldly. I just stopped pretending everything was whole. She studied him for a long moment, reassessing. This isn't just about Odessa's affair or the divorce. This is about Levi. It's about everything. The affair, the custody battle, the lies in court. David met her gaze unflinchingly. But yes, ultimately, it's about my son. He's a Pembry too, Judith reminded him. He's his own person, one who deserves better than the example your family has set. Judith's shoulders sagged slightly, the first genuine sign of defeat David had ever seen from her. What do you want from me, then? Why agree to this meeting? Closure, David said simply, and to tell you personally that the emergency custody hearing is tomorrow. Given the circumstances, the judge will likely grant me temporary full custody. You can't keep him from his mother, Judith's voice sharpened. I have no intention of doing that. Supervised visitation, until the courts determine otherwise. David stood. Unlike some, I don't use children as pawns. As he and Fig moved toward the door, Judith called after him. This victory won't last, David. Our kind always recovers. David paused, hand on the doorknob. That's where you're wrong, Judith. There is no our kind. There's just people who take responsibility for their actions, and people who don't. He left her sitting alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by the remnants of her crumbling empire. The family court building was familiar territory to David, the scene of his greatest defeat 5 years earlier. Now he sat on the same uncomfortable bench outside courtroom 3, but the circumstances couldn't have been more different. His lawyer, Ms. Reyes, reviewed documents beside him. Across the hallway, Odessa sat with her attorney, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the middle distance. Neither Judith nor Micah was present. Both were dealing with their own legal troubles elsewhere in the city. The courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff appeared. Rourke custody modification, Judge Chun presiding. David straightened his tie and followed Ms. Reyes into the courtroom. The proceedings were closed to the public due to Levi's age, creating an intimate tension in the sparsely populated room. Judge Chun, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, studied the documents before her. Given the extraordinary circumstances, we're expediting this hearing. I've reviewed all submitted materials, including the emergency petition. She looked up, gaze moving between David and Odessa. I've also spoken with Levi Rourke in my chambers, as is appropriate for a child of his age. David felt a surge of anxiety at this. He hadn't pressured Levi in any way regarding the custody situation, wanting his son's decision to be genuine. Ms. Pembry, the judge continued, addressing Odessa, the allegations against you and your family create significant concern regarding stability. The investigation into financial improprieties at the Pembry Foundation directly impacts your ability to provide a secure environment. Odessa's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client has not been convicted of any crime. These are merely allegations at this stage. Noted, Judge Chen replied. However, the evidence submitted by multiple law enforcement agencies suggests a high probability of forthcoming indictments. Additionally, Ms. Pembry's primary residence may be subject to asset forfeiture pending the outcome of the investigation. David kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he felt a surge of vindication. The judge continued addressing various legal points, but his attention focused when she mentioned Levi again. In cases like this, the court's primary concern is the child's well-being, Judge Chen stated. Levi Rourke has expressed a clear preference regarding his living situation. She looked directly at David. He has indicated a desire to reside primarily with his father. Odessa made a small, pained sound. When asked his reasoning, the judge continued. Levi stated, and I quote, "Dad shows up, even when everyone else lies." The simple statement, in his son's clear voice, struck David with unexpected force. He blinked rapidly, maintaining his composure with effort. Given these factors, I am granting temporary sole physical custody to David Rourke, with supervised visitation for Odessa Pembry, pending final determination after the conclusion of the ongoing investigations. Judge Chen signed the order with a decisive stroke. This arrangement will be reviewed in 90 days. The formalities concluded quickly after that. Outside the courtroom, David stood with Ms. Reyes as she explained the practicalities of the new arrangement. Across the hallway, Odessa spoke quietly with her lawyer, occasionally glancing toward David. As her attorney walked away to make a call, she approached David directly. "Congratulations," she said, her voice hollow. "You won." "This isn't about winning," David replied. "Isn't it?" Bitterness tinged her words. "No, it's about what's best for Levi." Odessa looked down at her hands, which trembled slightly. "When can I see him?" "The supervisor will arrange the schedule. Twice a week to start." David kept his tone businesslike. "He'll be staying with me, but I won't keep him from you, Odessa. Despite everything." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I do love him, David. Whatever else I've done wrong, I love our son." "I know." And he didn't know perhaps the only truth that had remained constant through all the lies. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. David considered his answer carefully. "You face the consequences. You rebuild if you can. And you decide what kind of mother you want to be going forward. And us. Will you ever forgive me?" David met her gaze steadily. "Some things you never forgive. But maybe, someday, for Levi's sake, we learn to coexist." It wasn't what she wanted to hear, but it was the truth. David had no interest in false reconciliation or easy platitudes. The bridge between them had burned years ago. What might grow in its place would be something different, not friendship, not love, but perhaps eventually a functional co-parenting relationship built on honesty rather than manipulation. As Odessa walked away, shoulders straight despite everything, David felt not triumph, but resolution. The circle that had begun 5 years ago was closing. Now it was time to begin something new. The cabin stood at the edge of the forest, sunlight filtering through pine trees to dapple its newly finished deck. David had purchased the land 6 months earlier, a small parcel outside the city, with a dilapidated structure that most would have demolished. Instead, he had restored it, rebuilding what could be saved, replacing what couldn't. The workshop behind the cabin houses returned woodworking equipment, the tools of his trade that had been in storage for too long. Orders were already coming in, custom furniture pieces from clients who remembered his craftsmanship from before. On the deck, Jenny arranged plates and utensils around a wooden table David had built specifically for this space. Fig tended a small fire pit nearby, methodically arranging kindling with the same precision he brought to everything. Levi emerged from the cabin, carrying a stack of napkins. At nearly 11, he moved with growing confidence, finding his place in this new configuration of life. "Dad, can we roast marshmallows after dinner?" he asked, depositing the napkins on the table. "Absolutely," David replied. "Fig brought enough to feed an army. I believe in tactical reserves, Fig deadpanned, earning a laugh from Levi. The past 3 months had brought significant changes. The Pembry Foundation had been dissolved, its legitimate charitable functions transferred to other organizations. Judith faced multiple criminal charges, her empire dismantled piece by piece. Ezra had struck a plea deal, offering testimony against others in exchange for reduced sentences. Micah was awaiting trial, his legal career effectively over. Odessa had avoided the worst charges through cooperation with investigators. Her supervised visits with Levi had been awkward at first, but gradually improved as she adjusted to her new circumstances: a small apartment, a retail job, a life without wealth and influence as buffers. David had expected to feel more satisfaction watching the Pembrys fall. Instead, he found his focus turning increasingly toward the future of this cabin, his renewed business, and most importantly, his son's well-being. As the sun began to set, they gathered around the fire. Jenny shared stories about her latest salvage project, a 1920s theater being demolished downtown, its ornate fixtures and woodwork now safely stored in her warehouse. Fig, usually taciturn, described his plans to establish a community garden in his old neighborhood. Later, as Jenny and Fig washed dishes inside, David sat beside Levi near the fire. The flames cast dancing light across their faces as darkness settled around the cabin. "How are you doing with everything?" David asked. "The changes, the new school, all of it." Levi poked at the embers with a stick. "It's okay. I like the cabin. And my new teacher is cool. And seeing Mom," Levi considered this. "It's weird. She's different now." "Not as." He searched for the word. "Formal," David suggested. "Yeah. She actually plays games with me now instead of just asking about school and stuff." Levi looked up at his father. "Is it okay that I still love her? Even after what happened?" "Of course it is," David assured him. "She's your mother. That doesn't change." They fell silent, watching the flames. After a while, David reached into a bag beside him and produced a small wooden case. Inside was a set of carving tools and a piece of pine wood, smooth and ready for shaping. "I thought we could start a new project," he said, opening the case to reveal the gleaming tools. "You've been asking to learn." Levi's eyes widened with interest. "Really? Like actual carving?" "Sharp tools require responsibility," David cautioned, removing a small knife with a polished handle. "You have to learn the proper technique, how to respect the blade." He demonstrated the proper grip, how to hold the wood, the angle of the blade against the grain. Levi watched intently, absorbing every detail. "Some things you never forgive," David said quietly as he guided Levi's hands through the first cautious cuts. "But you can forge something stronger from the wreckage." Levi nodded, focused on the wood taking shape beneath his fingers. Behind them, the cabin stood solid and restored. Before them, the fire crackled with steady warmth. And from the ashes of what had been destroyed, something new began.